Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another panel, this time on the topic of maintenance and repairs, how innovation leads to longer tenancies. Together with our panelists, we'll discuss the topic about repairs and maintenance and how they can be a powerful tool for landlords. What's the role of technology making repairs and maintenance easier, and how do property managers handle this now? And where is the industry headed in the future? Some of the questions we'll discuss with our speakers, and let me introduce them to you. First, I'd like to introduce Kim Lidbury. Kim is the Group Director of Property Management at Leaders, one of the UK's largest property services groups. The national team of property managers Kim oversees serves about 48,000 landlords across the UK. So please welcome on the stage, Kim.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome. Hi. Also joining us is Mark Tyson. Mark is Head of Property Operations at Legal and General Investment Management, the asset management arm of Legal and General Group, managing 1.3 trillion in assets. So please welcome in on stage, Mark.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. And also joining, last but not least, is Harris Khan. Harris is Director for Group Strategy and UK Commercial at Plentific, a leading digital platform for property management, maintenance, and repairs, serving over 350,000 properties. So please welcome on stage, Harris.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. So great to have you all on board. How are you all?
Very good.
Very good.
Great. Should we dive in straight? Yeah.
Sure.
Perfect. All right. So let's start with, to get a feeling for this. What are the common pain points in property management? Kim, you want to go ahead.
So in property management, property maintenance is a real pain point, I suppose, because you've got the tenants who are obviously paying for their property, and they want that property and that tenancy to go really smoothly. So the moment that there is a maintenance issue, it becomes a pain point for the tenant. And they're looking at things around, actually, how can I report that maintenance? Can it be reported quickly? Is it a weekend? Is someone going to respond on a weekend? Is it of an evening, etc.? So that starts becoming a bit of a frustration to a tenant already. And it's quite an emotive subject, isn't it? Maintenance. How quickly can I get something fixed? Will the communication be good with me? So that's generally a pain point. And then I suppose on the flip side, you've got, is a contractor available, the speed of the contractor, the quality of the contractor, and then from a landlord's point of view, the cost of the issue. They want to keep the tenant happy, obviously, but what's that going to cost? And again, how quickly can I get that sorted? So from a maintenance perspective, that is clearly one of the biggest elements of a pain point I would envisage.
Thank you, Kim, for answering the correct question, even though I asked the wrong question. Thank you very much.
Right.
Iris, you want to go next?
Yeah, I think I echo what Kim's just said. Ultimately, from a tenant's perspective, they are looking for fast resolution. And it is definitely a very emotive subject. And it doesn't really matter if you're talking about residential tenancies or commercial tenancies. It happens to be the same. I think the other element is around communication and transparency on that communication. So very often, in our clients, commercial and residential, we find that tenants' frustration arises from them raising an issue and then it going into this black box and them never finding anything out about it until somebody knocks on the door and says, I'm here to fix something. And that creates challenges in and of its own, because if they're not home, then that is a wasted visit.
Apologies, Mark, what's your take?
Yeah, no, I think it's quite similar. I mean, I look after both commercial and build to rent properties, mainly a little bit of single tenancy ASTs and stuff like that. But I think it's the common thing really, is that maintenance is often the invisible service. So if you're in a commercial property, you don't understand what you're paying for. You sort of take for granted that it's safe, and it's certainly in the UK from a statutory compliance point of view. So there's a lot of confusion about what maintenance is. And then repairs, you can't do it quick enough. And I think especially when you're dealing with someone's home, often in blocks, it's very difficult, lots of interrelated issues. So I think to what Harry said, really, the communication piece is massively important in terms of what are we doing, how are we fixing it, and what's the longer term resolution. And I think that's the bit the industry misses. Maintenance is so reactive. It's often always running to try and catch up, and as a result, that confidence isn't always there in terms of what the actions that are taken by that group of individuals. So that's one of the biggest challenges I think that area of the market faces.
And Mark, you mentioned the difference between commercial and residential. Like, where do you see specific pain point differences when it comes to commercial?
In commercial, there people. I mean, pre-pandemic, people in offices, like you have the classic temperature piece, which is often not temperature, too hot, too cold. It's humidity or CO2, so poor ventilation, and the total lack of education around that space in terms of how it's been fitted out, and then how it's maintained. It's this classic landlord tenant thing. I've built you a building that should operate like this. You fitted it out and put too many people in it, and then surprise, surprise, it doesn't work how you expected. So you've got this massive disconnect between what the landlord is providing, and for a lot of landlords for many years that hasn't been a service, and then what the expectation in offices, in particular, this is a big pain point because you've got a lot of people, they're like big hotels these days, in terms of an expectation of what they want in that space and what they're actually getting from it. So the news is post-pandemic, they won't be able to get away from that now. People are not going to be able to buy substandard offices, or well, they will be able to, not be in it for long, because their people are going to vote with their feet. They're not going to stay with those companies. So I think in the commercial sector, what we're seeing is probably more of a residential feel to maintaining buildings, i.e. this is a place I spend a lot of time in. It has an impact on my health and my productivity. Therefore, I expect a better service than I've ever had before.
Is that like, can you expand a bit, like from a tech perspective, from maintenance? Is that, do you see like changes or pain points?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Mark there. I think there is the expectation from a health and wellness perspective now that's being built into the employer's profile. So the commercial tenant, for example, for an office will be an employer, and the employer is expected to provide a space that works for all of their employees. And because historically we have spent so much time living and working in offices, the demand was so high in the commercial space that landlords were able to get away with whatever they wanted. Well, that's not the case anymore. People have seen during this pandemic that they can actually produce and be very productive working from home. And so now the shoe is definitely on the other foot, and the expectation from landlords is going to increase dramatically. And we're already seeing that in the conversations that we're having. People are asking us how they can be more transparent with their tenants, how they can bring them into the loop of what is happening on an ongoing basis with the property, and then whatever they're planning to do in the future. And they really want to know exactly what's happening when. And that's going back to that whole black box situation where the comms have not really kept up with the kind of relationship imbalance that has existed. So I think if, coming back to the topic of this, if landlords are not careful and do not digitize their processes and use them to their benefit, to Mark's point, they will find that tenants will vote with their feet and they will lose out.
It seems like you want to add a few things there.
Yeah, I suppose tenants these days are a bit more transient, aren't they? They have the opportunity to be able to move out depending on lease. So particularly in the residential arena, there's no more fees for tenants to pay when they're taking on properties. And you've got all of these zero deposit options out there as well. So if your money's tied up in a property you're currently in, you can go and get a zero deposit option somewhere else. So actually you have the opportunities to probably move more frequently than you've ever had before. So if you're not maintaining a property to the right level and the tenant maybe doesn't understand what's going on with the maintenance, isn't being communicated to, doesn't know the speed, their expectations aren't being managed appropriately. You know, all of that stuff will affect whether they want to stay within that property. They don't feel that things are being done quick enough and they don't understand what's being done. They have the opportunity to move. And it's a different environment, particularly now after the pandemic, as we've been saying. People are spending more time at home. So things that maybe they were less concerned about, you're staring at a lot more. You want things to be completed quickly and you want to know what's going on. So I absolutely agree.
I think we already kind of switched to the next question I want to ask. You've been already on the point, which is, what are the current trends in how maintenance is impacting tenant satisfaction? So maybe aside from the things that we already discussed, what other trends do you see currently evolving? And before you dive into the answer, a quick reminder to the audience that you can use Slido. If you click the Slido tab to ask questions to our panelists and upvote existing questions as well. Want to continue, Kim?
Yes, I suppose so. From my side, as well as, you know, not holding on to tenants if you're not doing the right thing by communicating, providing the service. If you've got an unsatisfied tenant because they feel that you've not, you know, worked quick enough, provided them with the transparency, I suppose it even comes to a point of renewal. When you come up for a renewal of a tenancy, and if the landlord's looking, maybe the market's changed in that last year or however long that tenant's been in there, and you're looking to put a rent increase in there, you're very unlikely to be able to get a rent increase if they think that the service and your reactions and the transparency around, you know, what you're prepared to do within a property. You're very unlikely to get a rent increase. So I suppose that will add to a landlord not getting the return on investments, etc. So I think, yeah, I think it all has a knock-on effect, basically.
Thank you, Mark. What other trends do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest trend, and I've been talking about this for a few years, but is we need to start changing the way we measure maintenance in buildings, because effectively, what we talked about before is that the value of the space becomes much more apparent in terms of satisfaction, but that's quite emotional, that's quite subjective, that's quite qualitative. What we need is measures which prove that you're giving individuals the best opportunity to be successful, both at work and at home. And I think as we're becoming more aware of our own health and things that impact that, I mean, you've got legislation coming on around air quality in the next year or so, where it will mandate commercial landlords to show what the air quality is in the common spaces. Now, what that means for the maintenance industry is you can't just wait for someone to find a help desk anymore. I mean, we have got one of the most outdated customer service industries in maintenance you would ever see, i.e., I'm too cold, I'm going to phone a help desk, that's going to send an engineer out to well, if you're lucky sometimes, send an engineer out to play with a few things in the plant room that nobody in the building really sees because they don't understand all that stuff. And everyone's still too cold because actually the problem wasn't temperature. So what we've got to do is move to different measures. And this, so if you're measuring humidity, temperature at the point of it's being consumed within 5 or 10 desks or in people's residential space, you're starting to build up a picture of data around how that, as I said, that data is being consumed. And then the maintenance teams can get on the front foot because actually they can have rules and they can have parameters against right levels of CO2, the right levels of humidity, the right levels of temperature for those zones or areas, which then equates to maintenance tasks. So if you've got a fan unit or a VRF or a VRV that's not performing, very apparent at a local level. The data then you're displaying to the tenants is based on something they would understand because they're starting to get much more education, and that's what we need to do as operators. Mindful of the fact we need to educate people in the space. And suddenly you've gone from KPIs of hours fixing 36 hours to the space must always 99% of the time or 99.9% of the time be at these conditions. So suddenly every maintenance is delivering to the space. The maintenance industry gets to a seat at the table from a value perspective. So they're starting to contribute as a strategic lever in these buildings, and everybody actually understands what they do. So I think the trend we're seeing now is not just putting sensors into buildings and having dashboards, which has been a trend for the last 5 or 6 years, is now operationalizing that into new KPIs, which are much more proactively driven to provide like a complete real-time view of how space is being consumed. And that is the game changer for the maintenance industry, because it moves you away from that I'm waiting for someone to tell me there's a problem.
So if I may rephrase what you said, kind of moving away from fixing tenant dissatisfaction to guaranteeing tenant satisfaction?
I don't think you can guarantee it. There's a lot of things at play. Yeah, I mean, if you sign a lease,
strong word, but trying to keep it.
Yeah, if you sign a lease which you think is fundamentally too expensive and you're trapped in it for 5 years, there's not a lot that the maintenance sector is going to help you with that. So I think what we're trying to do is take away all the reasons why you would be unsatisfied that you can control. That's the way I normally position this, because you can't go in there and say, oh, we're making your team 10% more productive. But if you use the analogy in sport, you can take away all the reasons why you wouldn't be successful, i.e. eat well, you warm up properly in sport, those sort of things. Whereas in the office and the residential market or any commercial space, if you're providing a high quality environment and you can demonstrate it day in, day out, why would anybody ever leave your space?
Yeah, I agree with that. And, we are actually seeing that a lot in terms of the technological requests that are coming our way. So as Mark said, for the past 5-6 years, IoT has started to become an important topic. People are installing dashboards, people are installing interesting hardware, tech-enabled hardware into their spaces to be able to read all of this information. But the back end of it is not solved. So they can get the data, but they have no infrastructure right now to do something with that data. They're not actually thinking about what is the technological architecture that is required to mine all of this information and then give outputs that are actually actionable. And so, thinking about things at the level of every per square foot inside a building, what are all of the assets that I've deployed, and how are those assets going to interact to make this a good space for the people that are using that space? That is the critical piece. So we have a lot of players out there trying to do their absolute best around, oh, I'm going to install a temperature system that can read the temperature every 5 desks. But then at the back end, there is nothing actually that takes all of that data, puts it in a dashboard and says, this is where you're averaging out and this is what you need to do.
That is spot on, Harris. That is absolutely nailed on the head, because the challenge you've got is it's not even just a dashboard. It has to be integrated into their workflows.
Yes.
Engineers work off the basis of having a certain number of jobs to do, especially if they're in a mobile engineering environment. They haven't got time to look at a dashboard and say, oh, well, I think it might be that pump or that valve. So that's going to be, that diagnostics is going to be done in the center, but it changes the workflow that goes through to the engineer, but allows them also to problem solve. And that's where I've done this a few times before, and we're doing it now in our portfolio, is giving the engineer the ability to solve those problems you're talking about, Harris, which is, I've got this data, I know this room isn't operating to the right level. It could be a number of different things, but then it feeding back into the CAFM system to allow them to still be paid what they were, or more ideally, because we can start getting into some interesting profit shares around this. But the fundamental thing that people miss on that is I've got IoT sensors and a dashboard, but I'm still not got my engineer doing anything different to what I did last week. And the resolution to that, which I have to say, the problem with the maintenance industry is that it's a little bit antiquated, to put it politely. Is if you've got things like 52-week planners, which really only look at planned tasks on a weekly or monthly basis, that's not agile enough anymore. You've got to be able to look at, these are the tasks I was intended to do today, this week, this month. What am I learning about the building? So now I'm going to move what I was planning to do tomorrow till next week to bring something forward. And actually that level of scheduling and that level of detail, as Harris said, is the missing piece of this puzzle at the moment.
And the interplay between all of these products doesn't exist. So that's also a thing that's missing, right? So you'll have air quality testers that come from a different company that have no interaction with the heating sensors that you've installed, and they've both got different dashboards. So you're getting all this data, but it's not talking to each other, which then leads to what Mark is saying. So the engineers are just doing the same stuff they were doing before because there's no actionable data for them. And in an ideal world, you would have all of this technology speaking to each other so that you can say per square foot, this is the environment. And this is the problem with the environment. Therefore, automated tasks for these 5 teams are these. Go fix this stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry,
sorry, Mark, to interrupt. Kim, you've been listening patiently. It seems like you want to contribute here too a bit.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, when I'm looking at, I suppose, the residential side from data that you can get from the tech, obviously, when you're looking at maintenance from a residential element and the communication's not there, having data to be able to pool if you are automating works through to a contractor, etc., and using applications and tenant portals for transparency. I think being able to pull data out of the system when you're looking at standard traditional repairs, just to see speed of repairs from contractors, first fix repairs from contractors, and using a contractor portal to be able to pull that data, then allows you to look at what contractor actually for a residential property is the most effective, the most cost effective, the speediest, etc. And so using tech for maintenance for me a little bit differently, by having a really great communication channel via applications for tenants that can report the maintenance, that then feed through to contractors, that can track the speed of reactions and interactions with tenants, the speed of fixes, etc. So for me, having data just allows me to work out who is the best person to go to a property to fix a general maintenance issue. And I think looking at it from a traditional lettings point of view, that's kind of the benefit, I think, for me for having tech and innovation within the normal residential way.
Yeah. I mean, to add on this conversation we're having, I would love to take a question from Slido, which heads the direction of the conversation in one aspect. Do you think in terms of innovation, the future will be multi-solution companies, which is going to minimize the time of fixing and ease communication? Whoever wants to go first.
I can try and answer that. I'm not 100% sure I understood it, but I think it's not about one company providing multiple solutions, frankly. It's about free-flowing data. And the current state of play is that particularly in the residential housing space, a lot of the systems that are being used are closed loop and antiquated. And that creates a lot of grief for landlords who are forward thinking to actually try and connect even two systems together to then pull out the data to do the kind of analysis Kim is saying she would like to do. And that's something that we've come across as a business many times. That integration piece is very complex right now. There's a lot of very interesting, useful data sitting in software that is closed loop, and we just can't access it for the benefit of the tenant. So I think what we need is open-minded, new tech that allows data to be shared freely at the behest of the landlord for the benefit of the tenants. And this is applicable to commercial and residential, frankly.
I think it's a process issue now. I mean, there's so much data. I totally agree with Heresy. Closed loop systems, APIs, integration is quite expensive. You don't want to be doing it with 10 systems. What you really want to be doing is extracting the data and then using it for your different use cases. And one of the things I think is really important is trying to separate the strategic from the tactical. So on our portfolio, you have a fast flowing stream of data coming at you every day, trying to help you make decisions around the spaces. And then you've got longer term plant replacement type questions, which are a different pace and a different skill set of people that are looking at those type of, and obviously the two need to meet in the middle, but it doesn't have to be the same system. You don't have to solve everything in the same system. But I do think the core data set has to be the same. So if everyone's using the same feed in, even if it's not live, it's a daily or weekly update, at least the decisions are being made off the same data pool. Probably use 3 or 4 different tools, as long as everyone understands where they fit into the process.
Talking about process, I'm curious about how can we involve tenants in the process and while making the maintenance for them as non-intrusive as possible?
Yeah, so I suppose with anything, when you're dealing with a maintenance issue, you've got tenants that want the process to be easy, don't necessarily always want to be there, etc. Want to choose an appropriate time without having to speak to somebody. So again, you're just looking at different ways of communications, aren't you? Sort of different tech. So if you had, by using tenant portals where not only can they report issues, they can self-diagnose issues if they need to from these particular systems. So it can manage expectations, etc. So actually, if it's something that they're responsible for dealing with, it tells you via a portal. If it's a generalized issue that they can solve quite quickly, it tells you via a portal. and then you can book your contractor by the portal, book your preferred time slots already so that the contractor already understands it. But I also think that the tech has to be kind of really decent tech that means that you can put the descriptions in very easily of what the issue is to stop people then from ringing you to try and identify and find out a bit more. So actually the tech has to be right on identifying what the problem is, but then the user has to be guided as to, you know, advising what that issue is. So I think you can use tech to stop the contact and to manage attendance, if you like, and access, etc., so that they don't have to have that toing and froing. And again, if they get their updates through the portal as well, the transparency of what's going on. But I do think it has to be the right tech for description purposes, availability, etc. Otherwise, you're not really going to get there.
Guessing, Harris, you want to contribute to this question?
Yeah, I mean, not wanted to plug our solution, but that's exactly what we've developed. In any case, I think ultimately the goal is that we have to create this environment where we agree between landlord and technology that we are working to the benefit of the tenant. If you don't have that as an ethos, you will definitely lose out. Where we are with the industry, with the headwinds that are now being faced by commercial property, as Mark explained, you know, people are going to vote for their feet. That used to not be the case when you got locked into a 5-year, 10-year contract, and then it got legal to try and get out of it if you weren't happy. That's no longer the case. The tenancies are decreasing, competition has increased, and I really think that involving a tenant into the process, giving them transparency about where the issues are, is all you really actually need to do. People are, on the whole, not unreasonable. The problem starts when they just don't know what's happening, and then they have to make several phone calls to try and figure out where they are in the process. That's really the only problem. Everybody's used to using Amazon, okay? Amazon very regularly says, I'm not going to deliver this package when I told you I was going to deliver this package, but I will deliver on this time now. What do? Nothing. You're happy, you know when it's coming, and unless it's an emergency, you just carry on waiting. That's all people need, just an update. And if it's timely, and if it's done through technology rather than in an analog fashion, then the landlord incurs no cost to do it. In fact, you end up saving money, because every time one of your team members has to pick up the phone and do this type of customer service, you're actually paying for that phone call and for the time that your full-time employees using to pacify tenants. So if you have 50,000 properties, you do 150,000 repairs, and each one of them turns into 1 or 2 phone calls. That's a lot of money you're wasting.
Yep, I think that's the key. Transparency is the key. The only thing I would add, really, rather than repeat what everyone else has said, is that you have to have control of your supply chain to do this. So one of the reasons why landlords struggle is it's all about trust, customer service, right? So if I say that this person's going to fix it, but I've got absolute no control over my supply chain and I can't deliver that, you stop making promises. So it's really incumbent on landlords nowadays to have that leverage, the relationship, the control over the supply chain, that when they say they're going to do something, they do that. And then when the landlord then commits on their behalf that they can get a person there or they can do X, Y, and Z, that is following through. So that's the big thing for me, is having the right supply chain, the right level of control, the right level of visibility.
I think that's something that we are very conscious of at Plentific. So we have created a system which allows you to have the tenant oversight all the way from the inception of the reporting of a repair all the way to recruitment of a contractor. And we do the procurement of the contractor in a competitive fashion, almost like a marketplace. So every job you put out to the marketplace will get multiple quotes. And then as a landlord, you choose where the value is coming from. Note, I did not say cost, value, which includes latency, availability, quality of work, all of these information that is actually available inside the platform per contractor. And I think that's really the way of the future, to try and solve it in the short term. But long term, it really has to be a confluence of all of the data that you've got sitting out there, being able to bring it all together into one system that is owned and used by you as a landlord, so that you can use AI to actually bring you actionable data rather than static information in lots of different places. So going back to what Mark was saying around workflows, that's critical. That data needs to create the workflow. Otherwise, it's going to stay slow.
Talking about how to solve this, it may be a question that I would first ask Mark and then Kim and Harris at last. By the audience, do you think the existing tech products in the maintenance space are fit for purpose? If so, why, and what does it mean for the letting agent and their users?
Do I think I think there's a lot of good technology platforms. I probably see a couple a week, which I'm quite lucky about, I guess. It's the integration into suppliers, because unless, as Harry's talking about, if you're creating a marketplace for some smaller suppliers, that's great, and it's giving access and some confidence into that part of the market. But certainly in the commercial world, you're dealing with big M&E maintenance providers, and they're not necessarily embracing the technology, and that's the problem. We need those businesses to start using the technology to drive the tasks, run the process, provide that visibility to the building user, number one, and the tenant, and then the landlord, secondly, to prove that that's being done. So I think the technology is there. I think this is a process issue. I've said it for years. Businesses need to really think about what they're trying to do, understand it. Like my example right at the beginning, phoning a help desk to trigger an action is like something out of the 80s, right? Maintenance companies need to think about what the company wants, the measures that achieves, and then work back from that in terms of the platforms and the data they need to achieve that.
Yeah, and I agree, and I suppose it's understanding what your customer wants as well, what your tenants want, and what your landlords want as well. And I think the tech that's out there at the moment, exactly as Mark said, there's a lot of tech out there, a lot of really, really good tech out there. And you've got various different customers that will either embrace tech or find tech a little bit scary still. And I know that will change as the years go on. Everybody will be using the tech, but it's absolutely, whatever tech you have, it's making sure that the tenants are effectively using it. They know it's there. The landlords are effectively using it, but absolutely with the suppliers, they're probably a lot of the suppliers, and if you've got the large or the smaller suppliers, sometimes they are not all about the tech or consistently about the tech. So actually it will only work if everybody is engaged with the tech, onboarded with the tech, and then it's it's consistent in line with the relevant processes that you need. So I absolutely agree with Mark.
I have a constant struggle with the word tech. Primarily because not all tech is created equal. And as I alluded to before, when you are a landlord and you've existed for 40, 50 years and you're used to doing things a certain way, anybody can come to you and say, this is a technology solution, and then they arrive the next day with an on-site server that they need to install in every property you've got, because actually they can only use it using exe files. So I think tech is a misnomer here. I think what we're talking about is closed loop and open loop. Closed loop systems they should not be qualified as technology anymore. They're just not. That's what leads to bad processes, because they leave gaps in what they provide. And then a landlord has no choice but to create a manual process to enable the connectivity between two softwares that they're using. I think the thing that I would want people to focus on is really focus on the ethos of the company that you're dealing with. If the software provider has the same ethos, that being that you are in the service of those that utilize the space, you will find that the solution exists, and you will find good partners who will figure out what the problems are and then solve them with you. But this idea of product sales and just opening one side of your overcoat and saying, do you like this watch or do you like this watch? That's a bygone era. That has to stop. And when it comes to the suppliers, look, they are keen to deliver a good service. They're being sold technology by the same people that are selling technology to landlords, and they are product-based solutions. They are not actual solutions. The world has moved on. You can't really have something that doesn't talk to any other system. Anybody that doesn't have a public API has no business, frankly, selling product anymore. That's my view.
And these are nice closing words. I would love to dive deep into that topic further, but unfortunately, we're out of time. And this is where I would love to thank you, all of you, Kim, Harris, and Mark, for your contribution and the very lively conversation. It was very insightful. And for the audience, please join us next in 5 minutes after a short break for the next panel, which is after the pandemic, back to the office or working from home for good. Thank you very much. Wish you all a fabulous afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.